Welcome in, everyone. Welcome in. How is everyone? The thing that I'm going to do today is talk about some of the data analysis that I've done around Lego. And so I'll do a lot of spreadsheeting and screen sharing for that. And the data analysis, I'll give you guys a little bit of a summary of what I had done previously. So last year I got into just looking at some of the ways that you can better identify kind of the value, kind of the perceived value of sets. One of the metrics that's been used in the past, and this is a terrible term for it, is price per part. And I started viewing that as kind of not a very good metric to use when you're buying Lego sets. Because that idea of what a part is has changed significantly in the last 20 years. And so things that might have been true 20 years ago are no longer necessarily true about parts. So people toss out what they think is a good value for a part. And one of the common, metrics was, 10 cents a part should be good. So you take that piece count and you can divide that by 10 to get a good price. But that's kind of gone out the window, I think, in the past few years. Now we have inflation hitting and everything, so I think there's other ways to kind of just assess the value of what you're getting in sets. And this isn't to say that there's a right or wrong way, but I do think one of the most important things is just kind of make people aware that there's more data out there around Lego. So, it's not just looking at the set price, looking at the part count, and that's it. So I'm definitely not a fan of the price per part, valuation. Things like weight and other attributes about the actual parts themselves can actually add a lot of value to figuring out what you like in a Lego set. So, what I've done is I've kind of done analysis of all the individual parts and figured out, what I decided to look at was the number of studs on each part. And so on its own, that's kind of obvious information and kind of useless. I totally agree, knowing that there's one stud and one anti-stud on a 1x1 plate isn't super useful information. But when you can take that and do that for all the parts that are used in a set and then come up with a number of studs that are present, you can figure out how many, essentially the term that I came up with was the studability, the connectability of those using the Lego system. And so I looked at that statistic across all Lego sets in the past. I don't know how far. I think it goes back to 1974 is when I kind of set a cutoff for that. So I looked at all the sets over all those years, and there's a very clear trend that the quote-unquote studability of Lego is going down year over year for the past, whatever that is, 40, 50 years. And so that's interesting. Now, of course, everyone counters that with, now they're making dot sets, and, those are a different thing. They have minifig sets now, which are just minifigs and stuff like that. So there are some things that are naturally skewing that, but there are some clear trends when you look at the data that isn't really refutable. You can't really deny the data at the end of the day. But I am not a data scientist, so I don't come in here saying that I've done the proper data analysis on this. I've just done some very basic Excel work. So do I think this trend is a good thing or a bad thing? So hypothetically, I think when I had last done the analysis, if you took this trend of the studs decreasing year over year and drew it out to its infinite conclusion, which is 0 studs in a set, that would land in 2060, somewhere around there. And I think it's a generally linear line that was following. So hypothetically, for whatever reason that Lego is making these decisions, Lego the Lego system would cease to be by 2060, which is kind of surprising when you see these dates start popping up. So as far as what it means long term, obviously Lego has a vested interest in making money. And so they're doing things that are just different than requiring studs. So they're now making lots of tiles. They're making lots of parts that have 0 studs on them, lots of weapons and things like that. Lots of smaller parts, and that's why dots are now a thing, because Lego is trying to save money and still prop up that piece count in the sets. Oh, you get 1,000 pieces in the set, and those 1,000 pieces are worth, a tenth of a penny each. So that's where looking at the weight of the parts starts becoming relevant. And again, this is just a bit of subjective valuation of this. If you value having studs on your parts or studs in the set, you want to have lots of studs to be able to connect stuff, reuse the parts, then looking at this specific data, you might find that interesting. Oh, hey, I want to buy this set because it has a lot of studs. Or maybe you hate studs. Maybe you want to have lots of tiles and all sorts of stuff. So you could look for a low studability value. And so that's the kind of the way I look at this. It's another attribute about the parts that people haven't really looked at. And there's other ways that you can start looking at those individual parts. Let me grab a couple parts real quick. So, yeah, there's lots of stuff you can do with any particular part. You can say, well, it's got 2 studs on top, it's got 2 studs on the front, it's got 2 anti-studs here. Yeah, so you can obviously look at this and just see how many studs are on there. But one of the other things I started thinking about is, well, there's like a brick space. Like you have plates, and you have bricks. And one of the things I think people potentially value is knowing how many bricks they have. So you could say, well, this has 2 bricks worth, right? Because it takes up the space of 2 bricks. And then you could start aggregating that data. Again, on one part, this is meaningless data. It's obvious, right? But you do that for a whole set, and you can start getting a sense of how many bricks, quote unquote, brick spaces are in this set. And that could be potentially useful to someone who's like, hey, I need to build up lots of big things. So maybe I should buy this set or that set because it has more bricks in it. And so, stuff like this, this has essentially 4 bricks in it because it's 2 by 2, right? So that's where you could have another metric. So the one I've done in this data analysis is studability. You could have brickability. How many bricks are in sets, and do that analysis. So those are kind of examples of attributes that, you could have available to people that are trying to figure out what should they get for a set. What do they consider valuable in a set? You could go to the nth degree with data like this. And so I think this is my vision of this is kind of the first step to building an enormous database of information that people could say, hey, I care about bricks. Let me check the brickability thing and sort through the data to find what sets to get, what parts to get, things like that. But in order to get there, what I had to do was I had to take the data from Rebrickable, who has a full inventory of all the parts, all the sets. And then I had to literally look at all the pictures of all the parts. Obviously, simple parts like this are very easy to figure out the studs for. So I would count the studs and the anti-studs for every single part. But there are tons of them where it's super difficult to figure out, like exactly how many studs and exactly how many anti-studs are on each part. And then it, came to it was brought to my attention about anti-studs. I'm sorry, not anti-studs. Offset anti-studs, those round circles that are there, as well as the gaps between the studs on top act as offset studs. So you can put an anti-stud in between those studs. And so little things like that became apparent that there's variations on this. But the end result of all this analysis was I went through the entire Rebrickable database sorted by the most commonly used parts, which is probably like a 1x1 plate or maybe a 1x1 brick or something like that. And for all the most commonly used parts, I assigned their studability values. And then from there, it could just go check against all the databases. You can compare all that stuff and come out with a score for them. This spreadsheet is a monster. It's now, I think, 20 meg in size on disk, and it takes up 2 gig of RAM when it's running. So this, I'm not going to go through all the stuff that's here, but I laid out what I included. And in order to kind of have one of these analysis spreadsheets, I had to kind of make decisions about what to include and, more importantly, what to exclude. So stuff that's excluded, Duplo. I just said I personally don't care about Duplo, so I'm not going to do any analysis about Duplo. Sets older than 1974 I excluded. So there's lots of exclusions. And then I went on to describe what's in here. From there, I began building out this enormous table, and this is actually filtered. Let me unfilter this, if I can find what is filtered here. What is filtered? This right here. So this starts getting really messy, but this is what the data comes in looking like from Rebrickable. So you get lots of set information, the year, and then what I have to do is figure out what are the counts for these sets. Now, unfortunately, I haven't refreshed this data, so there's a lot of 2021 sets that I don't have the data for. So that's why you see all of these say 000 all the way down, because they're all brand new. Look at this, 2022. All this stuff is so brand new that I just don't have data for it. But we start going back in time, we start getting all this data in here. And so this was just, doing lots of analysis about all the parts. We're not going to sit here and stare at this for too long, but the idea is that I can sum up the total number of studs for a set. I can get the part count, and then from there we can get what I call that studability value. It might not be extremely exciting, but for some it's fascinating, yeah. And so agreed that on its own, knowing the studs might not be super interesting to people, but again, I view this as kind of the first step to expanding the data that's out there for Lego parts, for Lego sets, trying to figure out what do you value, what should you buy, where should you spend your hard-earned dollars and pounds, as it were. So that set studability is really just a number. It doesn't, so it's the data comes from the Rebrickable database. So if you go to rebrickable.com, they have download files. They have CSV files that you can download, and I have inserted those into various tabs in this Excel. That includes all the sets, all the parts, lots of relationships between the sets and the parts. And so that's where I came up with that data. So this analysis uses that as the foundation, which you are free to copy and share, I believe, from Rebrickable specifically. And then there's other data from other sources. I think I ended up using some a third-party data set from just someone doing data analysis that includes prices. And then I also grabbed data from Bricklink. Now this is where this gets interesting. Bricklink is actually Lego, the Lego group. So they have some very strict data sharing requirements, which effectively is you're not permitted to share their data, period. So in my analysis, I had to use data from them to get I believe it's the weights, if I'm not mistaken. There's some data that definitely comes from them. And I am not permitted to reshare any of that data. So that's one of these examples where the data ownership starts making this difficult for me to share this project. But we're at least talking this through. So what's this data for, VR Gamer? So again, this is just to do a study on essentially the count of studs in sets. And so when you see this big green column here of set studability, that's saying, effectively how many studs per part are in these sets. And, that's not super useful on its own, other than to tell you there are lots of studs in this set. or there's very few studs in this set. So, you can use that. Maybe this is an attribute about parts that you care about. Maybe you want to see, as you buy your favorite theme, are they taking away studs? Are they adding in studs? Is studs something that you care about or not? And so that's, again, a subjective opinion whether you care about that. But the fact is that this is data that exists within these parts. This can be surfaced by doing this sort of analysis. I mentioned before, I don't know if you were here, Echo, that another attribute about parts that you might care about is whether it is comprised of bricks. So bricks versus plates. Maybe you want to build something really massive, and so you need to know how many bricks does a part contain. So you can count the 1x1 brick space as a brick and use that to come up with a brickability value for a part. So this is just one example of the various attributes that you might care about. Other ones could be tiled, like tile spaces. Instead of a stud space, it's a tile space. How many tile spaces does a set have? Then you come up with the tileness of parts and the tileness of sets. So lots of ways that you can analyze the parts, depending on what people value, right? So I did this because I was interested to see, and I suspected that they have been reducing the number of studs in sets. And that's what the data shows. The data shows a clear trend across all themes, that there's a downward trend in the number of studs in sets. So this is kind of the source table that just lists, I don't even know how many sets are in here, but there's a ton of sets in here. This has 9,000 sets in it. And you'd see that these studability values are all the way down to 2 and stuff like this. So it really does vary. We're going to keep moving here because I don't want to bore everyone. We're going to jump over to where I did this kind of overall set studability. And so all these colors here, and I apologize if this is really small on screen. It's a little hard to make this show up super well. I can probably zoom in just a little here. Yeah, I can't zoom in too far. By year, row by row here, from 1974 to 2021 at the bottom, you can see some of these have hot and cold spots with green and red. And so you can kind of see over here in column P, how many sets were released in 1974. And then you come down to the bottom, how many sets were released in 2021. So clearly, there's an enormous growth in a number of sets. Enormous. It's enormous. It went from 36 back in 1974 up to 646. And so then the data that I had to do is, because I'm looking at each individual part, I had, there's, I don't know how many, 15,000 plus parts in the whole database. So I got through maybe a few thousand. What I was saying here is, because I was looking at the data at the part level, in any one set, I might not know the number of studs. So from a random set from 1974, maybe I only figured out the studs on 10 of the 12 parts. And so there's a certain percentage of the parts that I consider to have a known stud value for them. But those two, I don't know what they are. And what I had to do was essentially say, let me only talk about the ones where I've successfully calculated a very high percentage of the stud counts. So that's what this red to green column is showing. It says I've only completed 22 sets here that I know the stud values for, and 306 down here I know the stud values for. Then you can ignore this R column. I should have probably hidden that. But the average SS, this is where the rubber starts hitting the road about this data. So this is the average set studability for that year, essentially counting for all those sets, how many studs exist per part. Back in 1974, it was about 10. And again, this number doesn't truly mean anything. It's just an average count. But as you can see, on average, for all sets that I successfully got a very high rate, and essentially my threshold, I believe, is 95%. So if I was able to determine the stud count on 95% of the parts in a set, it is included in this analysis here. The ones that I couldn't find or didn't calculate 95% of the parts for, I dismissed them because it was incomplete. But you can clearly see that this value has dropped from 10 down to 5. It's essentially cut in half over the past 40 years, right? So that's a huge change that hasn't really been brought to light. No one has done this analysis before. People say these sorts of things. Sure, they have fewer studs nowadays because they have more tiles and stuff like that, but no one's done the actual analysis. I tried to look for it, maybe buried out there on some German site. Someone did an analysis like this, but I couldn't locate anything in English about this sort of analysis. So that's a really big change. And some might say, oh, well, all these 646 sets must be DOTS sets, right? And that's obviously ridiculous. DOTS makes up a tiny, tiny fraction of the 646 sets that are included in this analysis. Yep, and again, and that's exactly my point, Echo. These are newer parts that were created that have fewer studs on them. But the fact of the matter is, for all the Lego system sets being released, period, today, on average, you are getting half the number of studs. Now, that's not saying, yes, I have been busy, Legendary, thank you. That's not to say that they're not adding in interesting parts. This is very much, I want people to not, so this is data. Data is science, data is fact. This is not an emotional argument about good or bad. This is about the fact that there are fewer studs on average in a set that you buy today versus 40 years ago. So if you value studs, again, this is where it's your subjective opinion about what you like in sets. You might say, hey, I'm only going to spend money on sets that have a high studability value. Or you might say, oh, well, I don't care about studs. I want to have all the tiles and all the dots and all that stuff. So you might look for a low value. But that's just one attribute of the actual parts, right? It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It just means that there's this huge trend. And there are, to some degree, other aspects of this that will kind of show that Lego is shrinking some parts. You're getting less in the sets than you got before. And this is where you start looking at stuff like the weight of the parts. And so the average weight has also gone down. And that's, let's talk about some of these other ones really quick. So average low SC. So this is stud count. So all those parts that are extra in sets nowadays, you get the 1x1 round plate, you get the 1x1 tile, and you get one of each of them. Those are low stud count parts. They have, and I forget the exact number I used here, if it's below 2, or I think it's 2 or below, or it might be 3 studs or less are considered low stud count parts. And back in 1974, that was only 4.4% of the parts in any set on average. Nowadays, these, and I'm not sure where these numbers are coming up and down from, but it's gone up to 10.7, and now it's kind of, I don't think you can count to 2021 because I haven't gotten through most of that data, but maybe the 2020 is pretty accurate here. 8.6% of the parts that you get are low stud count parts. So that's doubled. That's already doubled, and back here with the 2015, 2016 data, that's like well over double for those sets. So you're getting a lot of smaller parts on average. So yes, again, this is just the numbers. The numbers speak the truth, and that's what we have. So other data that's useful here is the average part count. The red means a lower number in this column. Green means there's a higher number. So clearly there's a tripling of the part count in sets in the last, and this is on average. Again, this isn't any one set. This is on average. You're getting 3 times as many parts as you used to get back in 1974, which is crazy to think of. No one would have thought you could say that you're getting 3 times the number. When I talked about how many sets did I successfully calculate the stud counts for, on average, it is 52% of all sets in the database that are relevant here. That are relevant. So that I think that that excludes the Duplo and other types of sets. Technic is notably excluded here. I do want to call that out. Technic is notably excluded because it is not. So this is an analysis of studs. Technically, Technic does not support studs. Those holes are not stud, not legal stud connections. So 52% of all sets have been analyzed, and that just shows you, so you can get a sense of how much should I trust the data for any particular year. 1997, I only got 21% of the sets, so maybe those numbers could be a little skewed. But for where I'm hitting 60, 70% of the sets, these numbers are pretty solid. Yeah, I'm sorry, Echo. I'm sorry for the tears. That was a brutal reveal to you. I apologize. And then this last column in W here, this last column, average set weight per part. So this is in grams, I believe, if I remember what the heck I did here. And so it was 2 way back when, and now it's down to 0.75. And that's under, like, that's more than a 50% decrease. Like, that's crazy. So this has been cut in half. You're getting 3 times the number of parts. Where is it? Three times the number of parts right here, and you're getting less than half the weight per part. Again, down to the part. So the parts are shrinking, but you're getting 3 times as many of them. And then here we go. This chart here that I'm highlighting is done by themes. So some of you might have been peeking over at this as I was going through that left side. By year, what is the studability of sets in each theme? And so you could pick your favorite theme here. Let's start with Star Wars because it's mine. That's obviously the first column I wanted to figure out. Back in 1999, studability of 9.1 for sets. And look at this. Boop! Down to 5.8, 5.9, 5.6. Clearly, Lego has made that determination to reduce the number of studs in Star Wars sets, very clearly. Almost half as many as when they started. Now, again, this is just the science of it. These are numbers. These are the facts of it. Doesn't mean that, Lego is stealing money from us or anything. It just means they are not giving us as many studs as before. So you could easily do a similar analysis like mine, where you say, hey, let's count up the number of studless parts and see how many more we're getting today. Maybe that's what you like. You want to get those guns and accessories and all those sorts of things that have 0 studs and maybe just have clips. That was the first one that I wanted to do, was figure that out, was what's happening with my Star Wars sets that I love so much. And then I just went back and I did all the biggest themes I could think of. City, the old themes. These are old themes that I don't even know what they're called. And this is the original town theme. So clearly, also it has a decrease from 10. This is again back to 1978. Old themes, these were the old themes. Then town started in 1978, and it's a clear decrease for that as well. Marvel, look at this. Marvel was 7, and now it's down to 4.6. This trend repeats over and over again for all these themes. And one of them that, you can then look at these totals across the very bottom to see what their averages are. So this set of old themes, again, there is a handful of themes that fall into this bucket. These numbers up here represent the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 themes. And their average studability, 9.8. And this obviously ends before the year 2000. So a little interesting. Hey there, Mr. 420, how you doing? Let me get back into chat here. So mention non-working studs and then enters profit DNA. Is that due to aesthetics, as the tiles look better than studs on most set? That is your opinion, Echo. That is your opinion. There are many people that highly value the studs and the look of studs on sets. But yes, I totally understand what you're going for there. And there's nothing to say that Lego is, again, stealing money from us or anything like that. It's just saying the number of studs has changed over the decades, and this is just revealing that. This is showing that there's a very clear trend. And this is where I'm hoping to work with some actual data scientists to do proper data analysis, where they could say maybe more definitively if this is statistically significant changes, and if it implies that Lego is in fact cost cutting, reducing the parts to take away those studs. And I think the data kind of points that direction, but I'm not a data scientist. I can't do that sort of analysis. I'm doing the kind of the high level grunt work here to just point out there's definite basic trends happening here. And you pick out your favorite theme. I was talking about how this is 9.8. Look at this one, Minecraft. Minecraft, out of the modern sets in the past 20 years, has the highest stud rate. And this should surprise no one when you look at a Minecraft set. What is it? It's all bricks. It's all basic bricks. It has none of these curves at all. So everything is studded, essentially. So that's a very interesting data point. I didn't even think of it until it popped up in this data. And I said, duh, of course, Minecraft is going to have the highest average because they don't have round parts. They don't, it's not about a lot of tiles. It's just about bricks and bricks and bricks. So interesting data in here. Ninjago, look at this, the worst out of all of them. This should surprise no one with all the swords and curves and stuff like that Ninjago does. Has, ever since day one, the worst studability for sets. So interesting data here. This is, again, summaries. And then I have other data that we can point at here. So this is a little faded, but it's essentially the same data. Give me a second here. So then one of the things I started doing was, let's take a look at this, because everyone's going to have ways to slice and dice the data to see if they can make sense of this. So the first thing I said, well, let's just look at the small sets. What's happening with the small sets? Maybe these are going to behave differently based on the size of them. Yeah, I am so sorry, guys. Let me try and zoom in a little bit more here. Hopefully this is helping out a little bit. The issue is I don't have this top row locked. Give me 1 second to try to lock this data. What is it? View. Freeze top row. All right. So now you can see what the columns are. It's kind of important here. So there's clearly a trend. Average low stud count here. Again, for small sets, it goes from green to red. Average part count, 38, and now it's down to 23, so it's almost cut in half. Again, these are small sets, so these sets, I don't know if I have the metric in here. Where's the metric? I believe, what did I do for the small sets? It's under 300 parts, if I remember correctly. It's under 300. And then I think typical set size is like 300 to 500 or something like that. And then large sets are above 500. So we'll see those numbers in just a minute. How many new parts have studs versus non-studs since, say, 2000? So if it's lower stud parts, then designers have more studless parts to use as a percentage. Yes, so this is where, again, like, I've done some very basic analysis on this. This is where it would be very beneficial to have a true data scientist who can quickly analyze more data, like including when was a part introduced, when was a part retired. This is another aspect that is relevant to the stud count in particular, but also anything, any attribute of parts, knowing when the part was introduced and when it was retired. So you could say, show me if for the length of time that the 2x4, plate has been out, has the studability of sets going up or down, things like that you could do. But yeah, I totally hear you that there's lots of interesting ways to slice and dice this across the decades. And I fully agree that things like tiles, curves have exploded in the last 10 years. Snot, here's another great example. Like maybe people want to know how many snot parts exist in the sets. That's a fantastic thing to have as a metric. What's the snotability of a set? So those are things that I think could come if this effort gets continued and becomes more of a community effort. Right now, I can't share the data because I would be sharing it against my agreement with the Lego group per Bricklink and the data sharing from Bricklink. So hoping to have some private sessions to do some more analysis and then look to publish out the raw data and aim to get people able to share that data more broadly. But for right now, it's just this spreadsheet. This is where this data exists. So I was kind of talking about, like, these are small sets. You can see that there's still the same thing with Star Wars small sets where the stud count is going down. Obviously, there aren't so many sets, so it gets a little messy in here. But there's a trend here. Again, there's still technically a trend in these tables. Now we switch to typical set size. I'll zoom in again for you guys. I don't think I can zoom in too much more. Let me do this. View. Freeze top row. So again, green to red for average low, average SS, very clear green to red. Star Wars, green to red, like green to red all over the place, green to red. So there's very clear trends here. Same with large sets. Again, it gets very sporadic, but Star Wars, you can see that green to red. You can see it with Friends, green to red. This one is kind of I think it might be because Minecraft, when it was introduced, had very few sets. I don't know what that count is for Minecraft, but it might be very few sets that skew that data. So interesting data. And then if we just come over and look at the charts, so this is what the data looks like in a chart format, and where I really started with this was looking at this trend line. So there it is, up near 10 and down below, or I would say close to 5. So what is this? This is the overall set stability, where 95% of the parts are known, where the part count is greater than 50. So sets that have less than 50 parts, it's a hodgepodge. It's a ton of sets, quote unquote sets, that are actually parts packs. Hey, here's 6 base plates. I made, again, the personal decision not to track things like parts packs. It's ridiculous to say that that's a set, in my opinion. It is technically a set that you purchase on the shelves. Yes, you can look at the setability of it, but it's not what I personally wanted to look at. So I excluded those to kind of make sure that those part packs weren't obnoxiously skewing the data. Because again, back in the 70s, Lego was pumping out tons of those part packs and they were all studded. And so it really blew up where the data fell and made it look even worse, actually. It made it look much worse. So yeah, these are all those dots represent an individual set. And this is the average over the years. Obviously, there's fewer dots on the left side versus the right side. But this is all about that trend over time, right? Yeah, lots on new small pieces. Don't have sets anymore, like food and accessories. All the decorations of modular sets, exactly. Yep. Depends on the themes that have come out recently, too. They use less studs of the parts they're using. Yep, absolutely. I totally agree. So I'm not opposed to having tiles, having weapons, having things that only have clip connections, for example, like weapons do. So the clippability of sets is actually another thing that can be looked at. How many clips are in sets? Because that speaks to things like accessories and other types of connections, hinges, and so forth. Lots of attributes that can be analyzed. This is just one of them. So that's the overall stability. This is what exists for the small. So you can see now this is looking at the small stuff where the part count was below 50. This looks a little different. And so the Studability is up at 9 and then drops down to 5. Typical set size, it's up near 10, drops down towards below 5. And then the large set, it's close to 10, drops down to just below 6. So these charts are just ways to kind of visualize it. Other overall charts I just want to show off really quick to keep things moving here. This is the average set weight per part. So again, any one part in any one set has decreased over 50% in weight. You are getting half the part that you were getting back in 1974. So that's a very, very, very clear line right there. Now, again, it doesn't mean that they literally took out mass from the 1x1 stud, although they might have done that over the past however many years the 1x1 stud has existed. It just means that the average part weighs less than 50% of what it did back in 1974. So right there is the indication that when people say that the price per part value of a set is so on, is good or bad, they are ignoring the fact that the weights of the parts has significantly decreased. And that typically means fewer studs, right? So they're making smaller parts. They're making parts without studs. They're removing large things like base plates from sets. Those now don't really exist as a common inclusion in sets. But when sets did include those, if you bought like one of the castle sets and it came with a base plate, that data is included in here because that was part of a quote unquote a proper set from my perspective. So that's a very clear line showing that parts weigh less than they used to before, and you're not going to be able to say, oh, well, that's caused by the dot sets. This is happening across all sets. The volume of data here, I think, is so statistically significant. You can't just say, oh, well, that's because they're offering you more parts. It's literally because your sets that you buy every day have fewer and fewer studs in them. They weigh less and less. And this trend, hypothetically, could continue forever until maybe Lego goes digital or something. So to Lego Legends' question here, did you expect to see a straight line over time or upward trend if Lego did not have an agenda? Again, I don't think that it's an agenda. I think there's always going to be the cost-cutting pressure, right? So I think this is where you need a data scientist to kind of help prove that aspect out, that this is like a very clear trend where they're shrinking parts, they're getting rid of large parts and things like that. I personally think that that's evident from what I've seen, but that doesn't mean that that's a scientific analysis of it. So I think that's going to be revealed when someone gets in there and does the proper statistical analysis on it to say, yep, there's a very clear trend that shows that the parts are shrinking in size, there's fewer studs, they're getting rid of large parts, and hence we're paying more for fewer studs over the years. I think that's what it will end up showing if we get to that level of analysis. So it's just something that people need to understand, that year after year, literally, if you look at this isn't like this has been stable in the past year or anything. Every year, this is pretty much going down. So next year's sets, this year's sets, you should expect to have less weight per part in your sets than you did last year. So that's interesting. That should be an eye-opener for everyone to understand that. And you might not care. Maybe you're so happy that you're getting lots of little spikes in your sets and you don't want to have big plates and big bricks and stuff like that. That's your own personal opinion. It's just, on average, sets are getting smaller, weighing less. And so you're going to have to consider that when you consider talking about things like price per parts. Price per part's a little very misleading. It's a little very misleading because it makes some assumption that the part that you're talking about is not changing over time, and that's not accurate. Average part count here is that tripling that we talked about. This is a pretty darn clear line here. It did kind of stagnate in the past decade, but blew up. I believe this is probably caused by lots of usage of small tiles and stuff. where Lego had maybe a design pattern change. And so I think, they must see these numbers. They must know what these numbers look like. And because they want to always say you're getting more parts in a set, they quickly wanted to get this number up there so they could put on the box that you're getting more than you got last year. So I think that's a marketing gimmick, again, that they care about, especially in the United States, probably. But yeah, there was a clear trend downwards. And this could have been because of the economy. Who knows what that caused this little trough here. But interesting that it's clearly gone up, right? In 1977, an apple piece didn't exist, so they would have to use a 1x1 brick to represent an apple on a tree. Now they would use an apple, and I bet an apple will weigh less than 1 brick. That is absolutely correct. But again, that's like a very specific example, Echo. Like, this is happening all over the place with all sorts of stuff. So, absolutely not saying that it's bad. It's just there's lots of things that they used to make that they don't make anymore. And there's also very limited. So yes, I took this data from Rebrickable's database, which you could download on Rebrickable's site, and they freely let you do whatever you want with that data. And so, yeah, I came up with this data myself by looking at that Rebrickable data, as well as some data from Bricklink, which I believe included the part weights. And because the Bricklink is Lego, they have a very strict policy about data sharing. So I'm unable to share this spreadsheet with the community because it contains their proprietary data. So I'm allowed to look at it myself, but I'm not permitted to share it. So I got to, essentially work on this privately until I can come up with a format where I can share the data that's relevant to folks. And hypothetically make it so that it's an automated thing where, hey, run this script and it'll build out all this for you and then spit out a spreadsheet that you can use, kind of thing. But right now that doesn't necessarily exist. And where did that spreadsheet go? So yeah, this is just showing the past 40 years of what's going on with these parts. And then if we just scroll down to the left, down and to the left, this is the average set studability value, which I shortened obviously to SS here. You can see it's going down from 10 to about 5. That's a cut in half of the average number of studs. Very clear trend there, super linear, and just proof that you are absolutely going to expect fewer studs next year than you got this year. And for everyone that buys sets, people, I would think, there are lots of people that are fans of any one specific theme, like I am. I'm a big fan of Star Wars, so I'm not running out and buying Friends sets, and Technic sets and that sort of thing. I'm just buying more and more Star Wars sets. So I would just expect that this year's sets will have fewer studs in them, and that's just the way that Lego is changing the Star Wars themes to have less studs. So it doesn't necessarily make it right or wrong, but, I'm sure many people would point out some of the airiness of sets over the years, how things have seemingly become less bulky. So these are all probably indicators that there is less mass in the sets, which is kind of revealed by, the set weight here being cut in half. Like you're just getting less stuff for your sets. So you may branch out into a few other themes, but you can't go crazy. Yeah. So that's kind of the big picture. And then in here, I had to build out lots of raw data of this stuff. So if I, somewhere in here, I forget where I put it exactly. Where did I put mine? Is it in brains parts? It might be right here. This might be where I have the official stud count data. So if I just scroll up here, stud count. So this is the stud count, this is the anti-stud count, and this is the total stud count for part number 61411. And then because I can just see this number, I can determine if this is, so I said it's lower than 3. So if the stud count is lower than 3, I consider that a low stud count part. And so that's like a 1x1 tile, a 1x1 plate, a 1x1 brick even would fall into that. And then here's the count of usage. So this is, again, the most popular parts right here across all of these sets. These are the most popular parts right here. So I'm pretty sure this is going to be like the 1x1 plate or something is my guess. It's got a very small weight. So, and that's, I went all the way down. Clearly, some of these don't have values. Some of this is very intentional decision. People that know Lego part numbers will recognize this. I believe this is like the torso. This is like the minifig torso, or maybe the minifig legs. And that is excluded because I didn't want to account for the minifigs in sets. It starts, it's not a common thing to connect a minifig torso other than to a minifig torso, like to a minifig leg and a minifig head. So that minifigness of sets is excluded, and this is one of the things I had to do to accomplish that, was just not put in the values for it, so it gets skipped over. And there, I don't have the values for everything in here. I just have the values for tons of parts. And I don't know if I could give you an exact count of the number of parts that I have calculated for, but it's a few thousand at this point. So that's an example, and here you can see the weight in grams here for all those parts. So this is the data that I used to figure out the value and weight. Oh wow, Cool Factor, welcome in. Thank you so much, Cool Factor. Thank you very much for rating in. Very much appreciate that. Welcome in, Raiders. I will just very quickly switch back the camera here. Hey there, everyone. So I am VR Gamer for Life here. I'm also virtual builds and virtual gaming over on YouTube. And I'm just doing some data analysis here. So if you were kind of expecting to come in and see me building Lego, I promise you, it's coming. It's coming, I promise. So really quick, Cool Factor, what were you up to today? Let me know. I'm going to take a look at chat here, see what you're saying. Thank you. Yeah, you got the raid down. You're getting very close to, yes, I do got the new stuff. So I got this, I paid retail for this from Kohl's, but I will be getting many, many copies of this from Costco when it lands there, hopefully either later today or tomorrow. You just concluded your Bricks and Coffee news chat. I missed it. You weren't on, and then I went live. Or maybe you were on just before I went live, but I was getting ready for this. So I'm going to have to go back and check out that VOD. So if anyone here does not know who the Cool Factor is, Mike is a longtime Lego content creator, and I believe it's fair to say you are a big YouTube content creator. So he's made a lot of content over the years. I don't know if you also have any blogs that you've done, but definitely YouTube content. And so everyone should be following the Cool Factor. He's new to Twitch, so everyone should show him that Twitch love and give him a follow. He's working on getting affiliated, and that should probably happen in another day or so. Next stream, probably. I think he's probably just held up by the number of streams he's done or number of days that he's streamed. So definitely give him a follow. He's a great guy, and has a lot of experience with Lego. So yeah. So and I'll give you a quick shout out. So yeah, sorry, I told everyone to go follow him, but I didn't put the shout out in there. So definitely click that link there, give him a follow. He's a presence to behold. There we go. And he's also been doing a lot of support for the Ukraine cause. So definitely give him a follow. I know that some others in the community are interested in helping out with that effort. So please give him a follow. So yes, we're closing in. We're closing in. I swear to be able to do this because I just kind of got through a lot of data. But cool factor. Thank you very much for that raid. I'm going to switch back over to the desktop share showing my Excel, which might bore some people, and we're just going to talk very briefly about it. And then we'll try and hop over here to start this build of the Dark Trooper attack. You raised $120 for Ukraine. Every bit counts. Thank you. That's so awesome. That's very awesome. So yeah, everyone, please consider supporting. All right, so let's head back over to the desktop, and we'll just do a little bit more of this talk. Oh, and I realized that my microphone is way over here. I apologize if that was getting really quiet. Hopefully you could hear me fine without a lot of reverb happening. So yeah, we'll head back over, and I will just try and wrap up this Excel stuff to not bore people. Okay? Oops. All right, so we're back over here, and I apologize if that mouse is super loud. So the whole thing that we're doing here is looking at the studability, the count of studs on parts. And I'm just going to quickly check chat here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Give me uno momento, por favor. Oh, John Stupp, welcome in, John. Good to catch you here. Raven, welcome in. My Bricks and Me, welcome in. Multiple mean 150, welcome in. Bricks fan, hey there, welcome in. Good to see you. I think I did see that before. I just was so flustered over the cool factor rating me. That was so awesome. So yeah, welcome in, everyone. Hey, thank you very much, Cool Factor, again. I appreciate it. Enjoy your day, and we'll wrap up the boring Excel work here in a second. All right, Brother Jeff, thank you very much. So, like I was saying, we're just trying to wrap up this Excel stuff here because I know it's a little dry for some folks. But what we did was we looked at the average number of studs in sets, set studability, or SS for short here. And this chart right here kind of summarizes it. Now this is ever since 1974 on the left here, up to essentially 2020, maybe 2021 is that last number. And so the average number of studs in a set has gone down from 10 down to 5.4. That's a very clear trend. We're getting fewer studs in sets. Uh-oh. Lone, what are you doing? Today's stream marked the last one needed for affiliate. I just saw that, Cool Factor. That's awesome. So hopefully you'll get an email in the next 24 hours. That'll be very cool. Yeah, we talked about that on your last stream. So that's the big trend. That's what I studied, and I did that by literally looking at pictures of all the parts and counting how many studs they have, how many anti-studs they have, and then summing those up as the total stud count. I also got the weight of each part to look at weights of items and everything, and then what comes out of this is a list of completed sets. And so this is kind of where you can actually make sense of what's going on here a little bit, because I've colored this. Price per stud here, price per part. This is kind of a variation on the traditional calculation of the valuation of sets. And then price per gram is over here. And personally, I thought it would be John Stupp, this is not for the faint of heart dealing with Excel. And I'm sorry that it's very small font. This is literally as good I can do. You're welcome to double click on your video to try and zoom in on mobile. I know you can do that. And the price per gram is actually probably a better metric to use about sets nowadays, because again, when you look at the fact that parts are weighing less in set, the average part weighs less with each year. Oh no, another raid. Ash, thank you so much. Welcome in, raiders. Welcome in. Hope you had a good stream. You were working on the Aston Martin? No worries, no worries. Get that shout out going for Ash. So she was working on the Aston Martin build. I think you were working on stage 3 of 4. Did you finish stage 3? And for everyone that doesn't know who Ash is, she's a variety streamer. She does gaming. The 1.5 hours was a bit ambitious. I'm not surprised. Hey, cock blah blah, how are you doing? Yes, busy chat. Finish stage 3. Good to hear. Ash, a variety streamer. She's got a very chill atmosphere. I pushed her to get into VR, and she had recently just finished up playing one of the biggest VR games, which is called Half-Life Alyx, which is based on the Half-Life series that started 20 plus years ago. And it's a great VR game. So she just finished that up. It was a terrifying ordeal for her, but she did great. She had a lot of fun with that. Loves to play lots of shooter games and is going to be playing more VR. And obviously, as you can see, is into Lego. So I think it's her weekly stream on Sundays that she'll build Lego. So if you're into Lego and you want to follow someone else that's going to build Lego, her current schedule, I believe, is Sunday for Lego. He died about 7 times yesterday. No big deal. Hey, cool factor. You got a VR set to play Alyx. Big fan of Half-Life here. Awesome. Well, if you ever need any VR info, please feel free to ping me. Happy to give you info for that. I have lots of experience over the past 3 years. So, yeah, no worries, Ash. Anytime. So thank you, Raiders. Appreciate you guys coming in here. We're just trying to wrap up this data analysis. I know T was in here a little bit ago. I don't want to drag this out too long. But this spreadsheet, just to summarize, lists every set, the set studability in this column here that's highlighted, the price per stud, the price per part, and the price per gram. And then just a thumbs up, thumbs down on the value of price per part and the stud value. And so that's just something that you could then sort by and say, hey, show me the best price per gram for a set. And it turns out that it's called Box of Bricks. It was the set released in 2005. Again, this is based off set prices that are static from when they were released. Yes, exactly. VR gamer for life, exactly. Scotty Rotten, welcome in. How are you, Scotty? Let me give you a quick shout out. Happy to help you, Cool Factor. Anything you want, Mike. Anything you want, I'll step you through it. So the price program, the only drawback for this is not take into account inflation and all those other sorts of monetary things. It just says back in the day this cost $3, and that's where we get these price calculations from. So over the decades, looking at prices can be a little bit misleading. I totally understand that, but you can filter this to say only show me 2020 sets, for example. And now we're looking at, for 2020, what has the best price per gram. And the set is Bricks Plates, which was, I believe, exclusive to Walmart. Its retail price, I want to point that out, retail price of $70 was never actually what it was sold at. It sold for, I believe, $30 until very recently. Maybe they removed that just recently. So for $30, for half the price of this, which lowers this even further, this is the best value for, again, per gram of a set. So that's amazing. So if you wanted to get the best, the best value by weight, this is the set that you should run out and buy, even today at $70. bricks and animals right behind it, 0.046 cents per gram. So this is where you can start saying, hey, what should I go out and buy? Look at the weight, look at the price per stud. Is it a good value? Is it a bad value? And what I had done was built my own table of the sets that I own right here in the middle. This table is the sets that I actually own, and those valuations just kind of quickly summarized, so I could take a look at a very small table of what I own and see what it's worth. To me, as far as studs, what it costs, what value it has. And you can see that there's just some interesting data in here. The set studability, I can pick out which ones have the best studability. The Scout Trooper helmet, it looks like it's my best one, or actually second best. I just missed the Imperial Light Cruiser, which some might not have considered until they think about it and realize that's a whole bunch of giant plates for that set. Price per gram, none of mine are award-winning price per grams. I think that's the Star Wars curse there a little bit, but price per studs is all over the place. So this is just sort of examples of how you can consume this sort of data with your own collection to figure out what is a good value for this. Again, all subjective, not meant to say it's right or wrong. It's just how it works when it's data. So I did produce a Star Wars table for just the Star Wars sets, and I have the green ones highlighted, the sets that I own. And so these are sets that I didn't own at the time that I made this data. But this is sorted by price per gram. So if you want to get the heaviest set for the cheapest price, you sort by this. If you want to get it for, the best value per stud, you sort it by this one, and so on and so forth. So very simple way to determine the best value for your particular interest. Now, I think this data is clearly broken here. It says $4.99 for this. This is not accurate. I have no idea what happened there. We'll ignore that for right now. Oh, no, you know what that is? That's the mini one. That's why. That's the mini one with 72 pieces. Yeah. It's like, what? Poe Damerons for $4.99. And so that's all I wanted to show off, was just that there's data to be found within the parts that we use every day to uncover patterns that are happening with the sets that you buy on shelves. And so if you're interested in this sort of thing, feel free to ping me, ask questions at any of the streams. I'm happy to kind of go over stuff with anyone. And if anyone out there is really into data science and wants to help munge through the data with me, I'd be happy to participate or have you participate in that effort as I look to try and expand this, get maybe all the 2021 sets included and start to include the 22 sets and so forth. So that's going to wrap it up right there.